Well, starting tomorrow, members of the Trump family will testify in the ex-president's civil fraud case in New York. Donald Trump's two sons, Eric and Don Jr., also Ivanka, will take the stand where Attorney General Letitia James is expected to grill them as she prosecutes their dad. Don Jr. blasted the trial altogether, pivoting to Joe Biden on Newsmax. Here he is speaking with host Eric Bolling. Let's watch.
This is what we're up against. Again, I think the people understand that. They see what Joe Biden's doing. You see the checks, you see the wire transfers. You wonder why the grandchildren are getting checks from the Chinese government. Those are all reasonable questions, and yet no one asks them. Our mainstream media, the people in D.C., unwilling to ask it, but they want to throw Trump in jail for 1,000 years and or the death penalty. It truly sick stuff, but this is why we fight.
Meanwhile, Colorado is the first and only state so far moving to keep Donald Trump from getting on the ballot there. Brought forth by 6 Colorado voters, 4 Republicans and 2 independents. This suit by the petitioners maintains that Trump is ineligible under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. Now, here's attorney for the plaintiff, Eric Olson's opening remarks yesterday, day 1 of the trial.
Trump incited a violent mob to attack our Capitol, to stop the peaceful transfer of power under our Constitution. That mob got within 40 feet of Vice President Pence after they chased him from the Senate floor. That mob tried to hurt and kill our elected leaders. And we are here because Trump claims, after all that, he has the right to be president again. But our Constitution, our shared charter of our nation, says he cannot do so. And Colorado law says this court must ensure that only eligible candidates appear on our ballots.
At the center of the dispute is a civil rights era clause in the 14th Amendment, Section 3, which stipulates that any person who took an oath to uphold the Constitution but then, quote, engaged in insurrection or rebellion cannot hold office. The ex-president's legal team is arguing the lawsuit is anti-democratic and rises to the level of election interference. Here's Scott Gessler, Trump's lawyer. Let's watch.
This lawsuit is anti-democratic. It looks to extinguish the opportunity for millions of Coloradans, Colorado Republicans and unaffiliated voters, to be able to choose and vote for the presidential candidate they want. In fact, the leading Republican presidential candidates. And by many measures, the candidate, most likely to win the presidency. They want to extinguish that opportunity by preventing him from running for office. It is anti-democratic. This is a case of lawfare that seeks to interfere with the presidential election. We argue here that this, at its basest level, this is election interference.
The trial is expected to wrap up in the next week with a result by Thanksgiving, so a speedy process. Very curious to see how those depositions go, or rather the prosecution cross-examination of Donald Trump's children. Very fascinating. I think what's also interesting about this case is the scope of it, that the result may only affect the state of Colorado. It's really been discussed as if it's a much bigger case than it is. If it's just, Colorado. Colorado's a populous state. It could matter in a primary and a general election. But I think it's interesting also that this case was brought forth by 3 Colorado voters and an oversight group, or a watchdog group, rather. They're the ones that got this case to the point of going to the court. So I think that's interesting as well. It's not, a judge bringing out an indictment against the former president. So that makes this unique to the other cases as well.
Yeah, the Colorado case, look, this is just an issue that has to get resolved. So we know whether Trump's name can be printed on the ballots everywhere, frankly. I mean, the law at issue here doesn't just apply to Colorado. It would apply everywhere. So this is the provision in the amendments to the Constitution that post-Civil War was designed to prevent Confederate people who've been part of the Confederate government or participate in the Confederacy from holding office in the future. Whether that language actually bars Donald Trump under this kind of insurrection understanding is, I think, extremely dubious. It's certainly up for debate. Now, there are legal scholars who have said it's written in a way, the same way that, like, you can't run for president if you're under, 35? You can't run for president if you weren't born in the United States. You can't run for president if you participate in insurrection, and he did, so they can't put his name on the ballot. It's just disqualifying. So that, again, that would be crazy. That would have a huge impact on this election if suddenly Donald Trump were simply ineligible. It would probably result in a lot of strife because, like his attorneys say there, he is the leading candidate for the Republican nomination. He's arguably, he's ahead of Joe Biden in many head-to-head matchups in many states. So it would be a way to just kind of to subvert the democratic process and just bar someone from running it would be wild. So it remains to be seen whether that's the case. If they were to win if they were to prevail in Colorado, it's going to get appealed. And if this gathers any steam, eventually the Supreme Court, and sooner rather than later, is going to have to say whether this is indeed the case and it applies everywhere, or it's not the case and it's kind of just a distraction and a last-ditch effort to somehow deprive Trump of a nomination that Republican voters say that he wants, and potentially deprive him of a presidency that, for all we know, a majority of voters would yield to him. So that very much remains to be seen.
Yeah, this case definitely, whoever's on the losing side is going to appeal. It will likely make it to the Supreme Court. So it does have national or rather federal implications. I think also when we consider the mirrored cases in other states, Minnesota is going to hear oral arguments on the same matter of the 14th Amendment, determining whether or not Trump can be on the ballot. Then we have New Hampshire, Michigan. Democratic legislators in California have asked their state's attorney general to look into this as well. So whether it's through a Supreme Court ruling or it's through every single state having a hearing on the pertinence of the 14th Amendment's application to Donald Trump's inciting of an insurrection on January 6th, that's going to be, determined on a state-by-state basis, or rather in the Supreme Court. I think we can expect either way, whichever direction this goes in Colorado. I think we can expect that. And I think the reason that we're seeing so many cases brought forth is because following January 6, 2020, when asked so many times if he runs again, will he accept the results of the election, he's given several non-answers. And I think that, the law is not as straightforward as many people make it out to be. There's also the court of public opinion. There are human actors responsible for implementing the laws as they exist and are written, or however they want to interpret them, which is oftentimes the latter is the case. But I think when you have Donald Trump saying he might not accept the election results in the future, I think that makes these cases more likely to be brought to court and to be heard and to be taken seriously, because I think people are afraid that if Donald Trump runs and is on the ballot in 2024, that there is a world where if he loses, he attempts to do this again. And I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of, that kind of civil unrest. I'm also afraid of the civil unrest if he's not allowed on the ballot in the first place, because there really isn't a viable alternative within the Republican Party to Donald Trump. I don't see DeSantis stepping more into that populist faction of the Republican Party. He's pretty much proven that he's aligned with the establishment. There's not an alternative, and that leaves a vacuum for all of these really excited followers of Donald Trump that exist in our country. That's going to be something we have to deal with. Who's their candidate? They have no representation.
Right. I mean, yeah, you're right. There are alternatives, but voters in the Republican contingent are not selecting those alternatives. They're selecting Donald Trump, at least in terms of polling. Obviously, none of the primaries have taken place yet, so it remains to be seen. It's theoretically possible that there could be some massive discrepancy between what the polls suggest and what people in Iowa and New Hampshire and other places actually choose. But we have no indication at this point that a substantial number of Republicans want the opportunity to vote for anyone but Donald Trump, and to deny that to them on some, 200-year-old legal technicality would not be a particularly democratic thing to do, in my mind, from the side of the political aisle that's screaming about how Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. But this is the length you're willing to go to stop people from being able to vote for him. But we shall continue to follow all these Trump legal matters, and we'll have more Rising right after this.